Welcome to Imagine Otherwise, the podcast about the people and projects bridging art, activism, and academia to build better worlds. Episodes offer in-depth interviews with creators who use culture for social justice and explore the nitty-gritty work of imagining otherwise. I'm your host, Kathy Hanneback. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Imagine Otherwise podcast. Today our guest is Rile Smith. Lauren is a poet and performer, as well as the founder and producer of Tangle Movement Arts. Tangle Arts is an all-female Philadelphia-based circus arts company with a contemporary twist, whose performances mix traditional circus like trapeze and acrobatics with dance, theater, and live music to tell a multidimensional story. Tangle Arts' work is devised collaboratively by its all-female ensemble and reflects individuals of diverse identities with an emphasis on queer and female experience. Lauren has trained in trapeze and other circus arts with the Philadelphia School of Circus Arts, the New England Center for Circus Arts, and Lava Brooklyn. When not on a trapeze, Lauren edits poetry for Cleaver magazine. Today, Lauren is here to talk with us about queer feminist circus performance, poetry, and what it means to imagine otherwise.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
So you're obviously the director and the founder of Tangle Movement Arts. So can you just tell us a little bit about that group and what you all do?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, Tangle is part of the contemporary circus movement, which means that we are interested in taking some of the traditional vocabulary of circus arts, which historically is associated with the big top spectacle, and bringing it into more intimate dance theater contexts to tell stories about ordinary people's lives. And Tangle was founded in 2011 because I saw a radical potential in circus arts to question our usual assumptions about people's bodies, from the literal sight of someone spinning upside down 20 feet in the air, to more subtle questions like ideas about how strong women are, whether they can lift their own bodies, lift other people's bodies, from stories that we can tell when we bring that literal metaphor of physical support or lack of support onto the stage. So Tangle is really deeply invested in telling stories about women's relationships and strength in all sorts of ways. And we have a broad palette using different types of circus arts and also using our 10-woman company to tell these stories. And our last show was part of the Philadelphia Fringe Arts Festival. It was called The Girl's Guide to Neighborly Conduct, which used aerial storytelling to unfold the drama between two sets of neighbors. And this show started because we were just in passing in the company talking about how every household is its own little universe with distinct rules about how to wash dishes or where to put your shoes or what's polite and what's passive-aggressive. And we realized that we all had great stories, or sometimes stressful stories, about people who share intimate spaces like roommates and neighbors, and sometimes collide in spectacular ways, even when everyone has the best of intentions. So for this show, we found that dynamic was instantly recognizable and really fun to play with. So in our show, at one point, a character who isn't receiving household help from her new live-in girlfriend grits her teeth and climbs a rope with a broom between her toes to sweep the ceiling all by herself. That always got a laugh from the audience. But we were also interested in digging a little deeper into the idea that human social behavior at home and in public is structured by rules and expectations that are sometimes oppressive, sometimes empowering, and sometimes contradictory. So we were really invested in having a show that didn't take there's one right way to be a neighbor or one right way to start dating someone new, but rather the idea that all of our behavior as humans are structured by rules and expectations that are worth questioning and bringing to light, whether we ultimately celebrate them or try to change them in our lives. So that's an example of the kind of feminist backbone behind the aerial storytelling that we do.
That sounds awesome. And I was privileged enough to be able to go see that. And it was an absolutely fantastic show. And you're right, hilarious in those kind of moments of recognition when you're like, oh, I've definitely had that experience with a roommate or I've had that experience with a partner. But also kind of touching, right? These kind of tender moments of friendship and of caring for each other, which was fantastic.
That's wonderful to hear. That means a lot.
Why circus? Like, what possessed you, maybe individually, but also, obviously, a kind of critical mass of people enough to be able to put together a company to get into wanting to fly around in the air?
That's such a good question. The contemporary circus movement is actually very new. I'd say in the past 10 or 15 years, it's completely been transformed in America. I think that it's absolutely exploding in popularity. And even just in the 5 years that Tangle has existed, I remember when I first founded Tangle, I would connect with venue owners or presenters and have these conversations, and people would say, wait, I just don't understand. Can you show me a picture? They would think I was talking about trampoline, and because trapeze and trampoline both start with T. And now people say oh, my 5-year-old does that, or oh, I saw Pink doing that on the Grammys. It's I think it's really exploded in visibility, which has certainly made my conversation with those venues owners a little bit easier. But it's been really interesting to see all the different reasons that people are drawn to circus arts in terms of wanting to watch them or wanting to participate in them. There's absolutely an aspect in which it's just, for some people, it's an exciting fitness experience, which I think is absolutely worth celebrating. But I think that there's really a way of telling stories that is made possible when you have this sense of magical unreality. When you see someone, again, upside down, spinning in the air, doing something that doesn't seem physically possible. And I think that that has given us a platform for metaphor, for literalized metaphor, that's been really powerful in terms of telling stories, the stories that we're interested in. And I think that I truly think there is a powerful platform for questioning our assumptions about gender, in the fact that circus arts is a discipline in which women build muscle and compare how many pull-ups they can do, and men build flexibility, and everybody gets held. It's a platform for adults to connect physically in a way that isn't sexualized, that's playful. And that's really rare, I think, in many people's adult lives. So that's part of the backbone of both the excitement that drew us to each other as company members. Initially, when I founded Tangle, and I was I just have this vision for a feminist circus show. I really want to emphasize women's relationships and explore stories from our ordinary lives in form of trapeze solos. So I found a community of people who were really hungry to use those platforms to tell these stories. And it's also the backbone of the adult trapeze classes that we teach under the same umbrella at Tangle.
Nice. So how do you teach those classes? Do you, is that more of the kind of fitness reason that people get into it that you're talking about, or are they related to shows in any way?
I think that people come from really different perspectives. So the class that I teach is a trapeze technique class that's mixed level and open to everybody. It's a really body positive and queer friendly space for play and physical empowerment. So it's truly focused on building strength and technique on trapeze that can be used just for fun, that can be used as a chance to connect with these friends you're making in this specific space, that could be used for performance. So I love this class and the community that we've built. And it feels like a really special opportunity.
That's awesome. So you've mentioned a little bit about kind of how certainly how feminism shapes the work that Tangle does, and the reason why you wanted to put Tangle together. And I love the phrase that you said, everyone gets held, and that kind of teaching teaching us, particularly as adults, kind of some important lessons that we have perhaps gotten away from since we moved out of childhood, right? And I think I love also the kind of way that connects to questioning gender norms. So I'm curious how kind of concerns of social justice or kind of, progressive, better worlds, whatever that means to you, how does that shape the work that you do with Tangle, but also how does it shape the work that the company does collectively?
I'd say that one of the central questions that Tangle is always really interested in. So our shows can really range in terms of subject and style. Sometimes, like the show that you most recently saw, they're very storyline driven, and sometimes it's more abstract and about exploring movement. But the central question that our shows begin with is depicting female strength and relationships between women. And though this sometimes feels really basic, it also feels deeply essential to us, in part because we live in a world in which relationships between women are underrepresented in media or squashed into stereotypes, even in sometimes places where we would expect to have them made central. So I think that is really like part of the backbone of our mission when we make creative work. And I would say that one of the other ways that our commitment to feminism is central in what Tangle does is the fact that our company is a collaborative experience. All of our work is devised by the entire company in a long-term cooperative process. We get started by identifying one question or concept that sparks ideas collaboratively, and then over a long period of back and forth, develop the work together. So that's, I think, our commitment to really collaborative work is part of our feminist values.
Collaboration is challenging, right? It's fantastic. It's something that we certainly strive for in the name of kind of the ethics and politics that we're committed to, particularly coming out of social justice movements like feminism. But as you know, it's sticky, right? It kind of, there's a nitty gritty kind of, complication to it. And so one of the things I like to talk with people on this podcast about is that kind of nitty gritty on the ground kind of work of collaboration where it's, it sounds lovely. Of course, everyone wants to collaborate. Everyone wants to be in community. But those of us who particularly come out of activist traditions, we know how difficult that is and how much labor collaboration is. It's important labor, and it's labor we are committed to doing. But can you talk a little bit about what it means to actually work in collaboration? Are there challenges that you all have found? How did you work through them? Both work within the company, but also when the company, interacts with other people, either venues or audiences or things like that.
I think that's a really important question. It is absolutely work. I think we've been incredibly blessed in Tangle and in our relationships with other people or organizations with just incredible people and relationships. We've had wonderful experiences, but it's absolutely work. And especially relating to the theme of our last show, it's especially difficult to collaborate across differences of expectations, of purpose, of cultural background. Sometimes just personality can make communication difficult when everybody has the best of intentions. So I think that's something that absolutely, even inside the company, we have spent a lot of time thinking about and putting work into. I think we really value the context that we've built in Tangle and have a sense that bringing our best intentions and our most generous listening and our willingness to give back and forth is something that is just as important in terms of the labor we do together as rehearsing for our shows or de-rigging after a performance or carrying things to the car, which are all many tasks that we do over and over together for the company. So I think that taking it really seriously and not thinking of communication as something that should be effortless or always will be effortless is an essential insight.
One of the things I really love about Tangle is you take that kind of behind the scenes collaboration and that kind of feminist commitment to that kind of collaborative work that happens behind the scenes, but you put it on stage, right? So it's both the theme of your various performances in their, even in all of their narrative differences. It's definitely a common theme across all of your works, but it's also the method through which you perform those works.
I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. Thank you. Yes, it's definitely something we're obsessed with. I think probably forever. But we've had really rewarding experiences also working with people and organizations that sometimes have very different backgrounds or purposes, but that we've been able to connect with on individual projects. For example, a few years ago, I met an installation artist, Julia Wilson, who I just happened to come across this beautiful like structure she had built out of wood framing and yarn. And I approached her and I said, I know this is really off the wall, but would you be interested in collaborating with some acrobats? Because I find that really warms people up. They're not expecting that. And Julia had never thought of herself as a set designer, but she was willing to kind of play with us. And she ended up making these really cool, visually abstract set pieces for 2 of our shows. So that was a really fun example of collaborating with a person who had a completely different background and like expectations, because she was highly trained as a visual artist with a completely different like kind of timeline for her work and like style of collecting resources, et cetera, than this like aerial dance company. But that was really rewarding. Wow. And another example might be this past year, we worked with the city of Philadelphia, which commissioned a performance as part of its performance in public spaces programs, which brought arts and entertainment to Philadelphia's public parks. So, their agenda was simply bringing activity and entertainment to a public park location, which was exciting to us as part of a part of our mission is, in terms of outreach, bringing free circus theater performances to various locations around Philly, particularly West Philadelphia, which is where we're based, and connecting people who might not spend money to see circus or might not even know that circus is a genre that they might be interested in, and bringing kind of, again, like depictions of strong women and relationships between women, and just sharing the thrill of seeing someone flip in the air, kind of bringing that to communities that might not otherwise have arts going on in their backyard. So that felt like a really wonderful chance to connect with like a similar but different purpose and collaborate with the city of Philadelphia.
That's awesome. So you are an incredibly artistic person, obviously, but you also come from a family of artists, right?
That's true. I have 3 younger sisters who are all artists. One is a playwright and actor. One is a violinist and violist. And one is a glass artist who makes jewelry as well as sculptures out of flame-worked glass. And my mother is a writer and an editor and the founder of Cleaver Magazine, which is an incredible online literary journal. So I absolutely came from an artistic family, and I think it shaped me in a way that was a great privilege. I think that having a family that had a strong value of artistic expression and access to the resources that made this possible gave me a sense that I was entitled to my vision of my own work. Not necessarily entitled to success, that's for sure, but entitled to the chance to put my own imagination and planning and work into a project I care about and see what happens. And I think that, especially in a discipline as young and as uncommon as contemporary circus arts, that was a great advantage. To say, like, I have an idea, let's see if we can make this work. And I think it's been incredibly rewarding.
Did you also kind of bring that sense of wanting to create projects, kind of believing that you can create projects into the poetry that you produce?
I think, to be honest with you, poetry is the discipline that I kind of grew up inside of as a young person, and was professionalized in before I became interested in circus arts. And it's always been so close to me emotionally that, and of course the experience of like reading and writing poetry is very individualistic. It can be done in a room by yourself. That I think it was difficult for me to have, just in terms of production, in terms of getting a finished project into the world and connecting with other people. It was almost too close for me emotionally to have the perspective that I have as a producer now. So I think that a lot of the same questions that I'm interested in as a poet, I get to attack in a sideways way as a circus artist and as a circus producer. And of course, I will not lie. It is like way easier to market a circus art show than it is to market your poetry reading.
I would imagine.
That was
for better or worse, right?
Absolutely. That was a thing I discovered and was like, oh, I was like, oh, maybe like if I can package the ideas I'm interested in representing about like bodies and relationships and like women and feminism and like what it means to like have a body, like, which I think is something I've always been obsessed with, in part because of my background as someone with chronic pain. Like if I can package that in a way that involves like spinning through the air, like that truly, like gives me a great leg up in terms of connecting with people. But I think that one of the things that I, as someone who comes from a literary background, and absolutely the other members of Tangle who come from, like, we have gymnasts and dancers and theater artists, but we also have people who are like PhDs in contemporary literature, or in comparative literature, and scientists, and like many different backgrounds, which like inform our work in ways that I find to be like amazing and exciting. So I think that Tangle does have a really like interdisciplinary spirit and brings in like techniques and inspirations from all different types of artistic fields.
So you mentioned several of the performers, the company members, coming from the world of academia, and I know you have a particular connection to academia as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your connection, and then maybe how you see some of the ideas maybe, or the kind of methodologies of academia showing up maybe unexpectedly in Tangle's work?
That's a wonderful question. So speaking for myself, I work in the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at the University of Pennsylvania. And my job specifically involves coordinating between curators and conservators and the Public Services Department to house and protect our collections and keep them organized and findable. So I believe strongly that archival work has an activist aspect to it. Archival work is preserving our cultural heritage and choosing what cultural heritage is on the table for preservation, what kind of resources are given to it, and what populations these resources are made accessible to are all really close to my heart. And I will put in a plug and say that the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at the University of Pennsylvania is an incredible resource that is open to the public, and you only need photo ID to use our collections. So I think that's like radical in of itself. Many Rare Book and Manuscript libraries are only accessible to scholars with a letter of introduction and so forth. So I'm proud of being part of that organization. But I'll also say that for me, my job there is fits into the puzzle of my life in that it is a stable, endurable day job that makes it possible to put energy into my artistic work without fear. So every artist strikes their own balance, but this has been a major part of the puzzle for me. And I think that it's been interesting to see how that settles out for the rest of my company or for the rest of my friends who are professional circus artists, as well as my friends who are artists in general, or just people putting their lives together in general. And so that is what that means to me.
Okay. And that's, I mean, I've talked with so many artists about kind of the difficulty of supporting yourself financially, kind of monetarily, while also producing art. And there's, a million different ways that people have gone about, trying to do that, right? And, from everything from getting grants for particular projects, particularly because there aren't a whole lot of grants for artists, right? Artists as humans, with kind of shifts in the NEA, but there are grants for projects. So kind of going that route versus, trying to get a company together versus getting involved, forging partnerships with institutions versus bootstrapping it, all of these different, and it's, of course, it's usually a mix of whatever you can kind of scrape together in the moment, right? Project to project, year to year. But it seems like more and more people I know, at least artists that I know, are doing essentially what you're doing, where kind of holding down a day job or a kind of stable position, hopefully it's something that they enjoy and that they are fulfilled by in some way, but it's what basically enables them to produce their art.
Absolutely. And I think it's, just to speak to Tangle, the members of our company are all employed outside of our company, and in ways that generally really commit them to the city of Philadelphia, which, to be completely honest with you, when Tangle began, that's something I was a little self-conscious about, as if it implied, oh, these artists are not full-time artists. They have this other life. Maybe it compromises their artistic vision or whatever. But I realized that I think that was just a classist hang-up I had, to be frank. But down the pike, a few years into Tangle's existence, and after many conversations with other artists, particularly circus artists, I realized that in the field of circus arts in particular, employment is so frequently structured by short-term contracts that move people around geographically, that it's very hard to create lasting partnerships with other artists, because you're working on an act that's made from a sense of love and fascination with a particular idea or driven by a particular mission. And then your flyer says to you, oh, I just got a contract. I'll see you in 2 months. I'm going to France. So I actually, I came to realize that it's absolutely a strength for our particular company where we are at this juncture, that the members of the company have many ties both to each other and to the location, the city of Philadelphia, where we're located. So I've come to actually feel that's a real strength for us. But as you say, there are so many solutions, and artists find the ones that work for them.
I'm curious about the connection to Philadelphia beyond just, it keeps a kind of tight knit company, or it ensures that people are committed, are going to stick around. Right. But what is the relationship between the kind of very specific geographical place that you're producing this kind of work in, that you all are producing this work in? Is it, in some of your shows, I've seen Philly almost seems to be a character of some sort, much more than a background, right? There's so many very Philly specific references and things like that. But it also seems to maybe bring up an issue of another kind of social justice question, right? Is that kind of commitment to community and to being accountable to the community from which you come and in which you are embedded, rather than being a kind of, artistic troupe that just happens to be working in a space for now, but next week, who knows, we'll be somewhere else. Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful perspective. I think that is a subtext of that has come up in our conversations, or that we feel as a company that really is rooted in this community. We've absolutely, I think, grown and discovered and developed a community increasingly as we've existed. Again, contemporary circus being such a young field, I think when Tangle began, many people who are now part of Tangle's community had no idea that this type of work even existed. So I think that that's something that is very meaningful to us. and does make our stories more specific sometimes. As you said, I think, in our last show about neighbors, we really we're very rooted in the sense of like the Philadelphia row house being like a very specific environment for this story that we wanted to tell.
That's great. So we're getting to my favorite question that I get to ask guests in the podcast. So obviously this podcast is called Imagine Otherwise. And one of the things that I'm really excited that I get to talk about with guests is their version of a better world, that version of a world that they're working towards when they make their art, when they teach their classes, when they write their books, when they produce whatever kind of amazing stuff that they produce in the world. So what's the world you're working towards? What do you want?
I love this question. I'm going to take a little step backwards first and tell you a little bit more about my background,
Sure.
what brought me to circus arts, which is that, as I mentioned briefly earlier, I've experienced chronic pain my entire adult life, mostly, joint pain that has really fluctuated and sometimes really compromises my mobility or ability to kind of do everyday tasks, and sometimes doesn't. And I've had a long road of no diagnoses and so forth. So when before I connected with the world of circus arts, I had really settled into a strategy for managing it in which I was a brain in a jar. I had no connection to my body. I just flipped that switch, and I felt like I thought of my body as this apartment that I lived in that I rented from a slumlord, and don't
That's such a great metaphor.
And it was well, the faucet, the water's not running today, whatever, don't step on that floorboard, but it doesn't really matter because it's not who I am. And when I discovered circus arts, I realized that I could have a different relationship with my body. And that relationship has been I felt like a completely different dimension was open to me. And I realized that my body is a partner. It's a creative constraint. It's something to take care of, like a beloved pet. It's something that has information for me, sometimes whether I want to hear it or not. And it is me. I'm nothing other than body. So I think that was a revelation that was a little terrifying and yet very seductive and exciting. And so I had so much anxiety when I started circus arts because I had so much anxiety about my body and pain. And, I also, as a human being who was socialized female in this time and place, was very hung up on what my body looked like and what that meant in terms of what my value was and so forth. And I realized that as I slowly became stronger through training circus arts, and I really started at zero, so anyone can become a trapeze artist. I truly believe this. As I became stronger through training circus arts, I had less pain, which I think is one feminist footnote to my story. Is all the doctors that I had seen, none of them ever said, "Oh, you need strength training to stabilize your joints." I think they saw a young woman in pain, and that didn't even occur to them as a possible solution. So that's one of my takeaways from the story. But I also realized that I cared about what my body could do and not necessarily what it looked like or what stories it could tell or how it could connect to other people. And that opened up a sense of capacity and freedom that I've been addicted to ever since. So I think that my story is not that unusual. I think that there are many people who, for whatever reason, are disconnected from their own bodies and have very limited ways of interacting with other people's bodies. I think that especially, as you mentioned earlier, in adulthood, we have really prescribed scripts for interacting with other adults' bodies, and it's frequently sexualized or envious or proprietary or judgmental. And so part of my picture, my contribution to a vision of a better world is a world in which embodiment is a source of power and of stories and a positive connection with other people that is creative and loving and playful. And I want that to be free, and I want it to be prevalent. And it's part of the work that we do when we make shows or teach classes or bring our free shows to the public.
I love that. I want that too. Well, for those of you who haven't had a chance to see Tangle Arts, I highly recommend it, if for no other reason, and there are a million reasons, but yet one more is that you actually get to see an example of this kind of body politics on stage, which is just phenomenal to watch. So do you have any upcoming shows that folks might be interested in?
I'm really excited about our next full-length show, which will be in March 16th through 19th. And it'll be our 5-year retrospective. So we'll be taking some of Tangle's greatest hits and reviving and remix them to tell a few new stories. And that'll be at Christ Church Neighborhood House in Old City, Philadelphia. And we're really looking forward to sharing it.
So where can we find you online, learn more about Tangle Arts, perhaps hear about upcoming shows and the like?
Well, we have many ways in which you can connect with us online. I think you have the URL for our website.
Yep, and this will go in the show notes too. But
oh, great.
It's nice to hear you actually say it.
Excellent. Okay, so our website is tangle-arts.com. We're on Facebook under Tangle Movement Arts. And we also are on Instagram and Tumblr and Twitter as Tangle_arts. And we have a mailing list if you just want the facts, which is accessible on our website. So it's really fun to connect with people across the globe who are interested in contemporary circus or feminist performance. And we have a lot of very beautiful photos to share.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. This was quite a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Imagine Otherwise. Editing for this episode was done by Julie Leonard. Be sure to check out our website at imagineotherwise.com to listen to full episodes, read show notes, and see links to the people, books, and projects discussed on the show. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes.